possession win. Here's a story that just is coming down. Texas gets what they want, right, when it comes to players, and not everybody, but when it comes to coaching staff, they can put together one hell of a staff. But then those guys become in demand, and you only have a handful of schools where somebody might leave UT. Well, Bo Davis, who's had a huge impact on the Texas defense, to Vondre Sweat, also obviously with Murphy and company, is headed back to his alma mater at LSU. There's the tie-in there. The new defensive line coach, Brian Kelly, trying to remake that Tigers defensive staff.
Well, I think as much as any coach on the staff, Bo Davis probably deserves a lot of credit for the culture rebuild there, because he was the one on the famous recording that kind of had to say what needed to be. Sometimes it's hard to tell people, like, look, you don't want to be here, don't be here, or this is not how we're going to do things. But he seized a moment to get after a bad culture problem that Texas had lingering over several staffs, and was emphatic about it. And look, their defensive line was as good as anyone's in the entire country this year. And LSU, who has, Mason Smith, who's going to the NFL. They have Mekhi Wingo, who's going to the NFL. They've got NFL guys along that line. They certainly didn't play like it this year. And maybe just because they're going to continue to get those guys at LSU. Like, that's not really a problem. Brian Kelly is not going to not get those guys, but they need to, when you have Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo on the defensive line, you need to not get gashed in the run game like they did. So what do you do to fix that problem? Well, who's the best at it right now? And, look, he's an alum here. Go get Bo Davis. That is a huge even bigger than bringing in the defensive coordinator from Mizzou. Bringing in Bo Davis, I think, for the LSU defense to help them recapture the inherent LSU-ness of themselves is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's an LSU alum, so you start there. I mean, that's his home base. He's been there twice already. This will be his third go-around as a coach, so they know him and he knows them, and there's a tight bond there, and he'll jump right in the deep end and probably not skip a beat. I do think that if you read the various reactions to it, there's always going to be some people that are just coping. Like, you could lose – like Sark could jump to Oklahoma, and they'd be like, we didn't like Sark. There's always going to be that, but there are – plenty of people pointing out the great job he did at Texas, but also feel like there is room to be as good, if not better, that he wasn't the end-all, be-all necessarily. Like, it's not like they're not going to be able to not develop defensive linemen. So I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of certainly it's a loss. There's no doubt about that. And Texas isn't accustomed to losing people very often, especially to a team they're about to go be in a league with. But there are areas where they can stand to be as good, or maybe improve a little bit in recruiting. And then maybe that's just coping too. But that's just some of the reaction that I've seen from Texas fans. It's not necessarily the end of the world, but there is a good mix of it that is, oh, shoot, like, did we just lose a guy to LSU? Like, really? And at a position where, I mean, that was really where we made our bread and butter this past year. That's where most of the attention was on that defensive line. So He's a loss. He's one of the best assistant coaches in the country, and has been, around for a very long time now. So I think that's a tremendous get for LSU and Brian Kelly to bring him back into the fold. I saw Kirk Bowles mention that his son plays at Southeastern Louisiana, so maybe they get him to transfer on over to LSU. I don't know if that'll be the case or not, but I think the Tigers are rightfully happy to bring him home, and the Longhorns, that's a loss. But let's see who they go and get, because that will be the real tell, is who do they replace him with, because you're not guaranteed to necessarily just not skip a beat. But if you find the right guy, maybe you can. So that'll be the big thing, is who Texas goes and gets.
Exactly right. But they'll have their list of candidates will be, that means somebody else out there in college football has to wonder, even if they're paying somebody $1 million, $1.5 million, or whatever it is to be a defensive coach. So there's that. With the story about Bo Davis. And you're right, Paul, his tirade and his tongue lashing of the football team, was that the game, was that at Oklahoma State or Iowa State when he lost? Iowa State when he lost his mind, basically all but questioning their manhood, and maybe even that may have been, and I even think Sarkisian alluded to that at one point, that might have been a turning point. Because not saying that was it, but it surely got the message across.
I think there are moments across building a culture for things, right? There are different things that happen, and part of it is Steve Sarkisian coming in and kind of refocusing efforts in certain spots and getting different kind of guys in there. But the one thing that is really hard to do, especially at places like Texas, is break up entitlement, like to kind of shatter that, because what Texas's problem wasn't that they were not getting good players, is that there was a kind of, and it was probably from outside the program as well, but, you know, if you were a player on the Texas football team, before you'd actually done anything, you felt like you'd made it. And you were standing on the shoulders of the people who came before you and not earning. Like, what that 05 team did for Texas, you know, was amazing. Like, they had brought them out of just being kind of a good team for a while and brought them into greatness in this level that college athletics, I mean, they even got the television network out of that season. All these different things that happened because of that. And then you've got all these people, like players that are like, oh yeah, we're just like, you know, the Vince Young team. Like, no, you're not. And maybe nobody had ever told them in the way that Bo Davis told them.
Sometimes what happens is you have players who join a program, from however they come in, and they forget about the hard work it took to get to where they were, of why you wanted to pick a program. It doesn't just happen at Texas. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple that, yeah, there was an entitlement issue. There probably always will be when you're, you know, at the top of the list when it comes to the most money and the, you know, all the various things that come with playing at Texas. It's hard to avoid those distractions, right? I mean, you're rolling around Austin, you're making good NIL probably. I mean, things, top-tier program, top-tier facilities. Like, I could see as a 19-year-old, 18-year-old, 20-year-old how it's easy to get distracted, and I could see when you're just kind of mowing and going on along how you can feel a little bit entitled. But, you know, that was 2 years ago. That was almost 3 years ago now at this point, and that is what he's famous for. I think that's kind of also where some Texas fans are coming from, is like, all right, name something he did besides the rant. You know, like something individually.
Well, he recruited a lot of pretty good talent.
But he didn't recruit all those guys, though, too. Like,
You're
he doesn't
right.
get all the credit for Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy and those guys. So that's sort of where I was saying some fans are coming from. And, yes, it is cope, because that's an ego blow to lose Bo Davis to LSU. At minimum, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think that he helped them move past that ugly video or embarrassing video that wasn't a big deal in the long run, but it was a big deal in the moment, and it was a big deal, I think, in some ways in the turning point of changing that culture and getting to where they find themselves in the playoff a couple of years later, and with a team that did not seem to be that way really at all. Like, I'm sure there was still plenty of ego. I'm sure that, you know, there were certain guys who had their moments, but for the most part, that was a Texas team that was locked in and was able to play with a confidence but not a cockiness. And there was some cockiness, but you know what I mean. It wasn't just we're good just because we say we're good. It's like, no, you walk the walk.
Wearing this jersey.
Yeah,
yes,
you walk the walk
and
and not just talk the talk, and I think he did play a role in that.
And Tavondre Sweat, big animal of a man, an unbelievable player, incredible player, award-winning player, probably had to get his ego checked along with all the others in that particular position room. Now, college football ended